All cancer uses these pathways to generate. If we are able to cut the regenerative engine at the root, this truly is the closest to a cancer cure proven in a human that we've ever had. So the cancer she had is called triple-negative breast cancer. Less than 1% with her cancer would survive 3 months. Part of the thing was, number one, getting the right molecule that could crack the cancer open. Number two was to starve its energy. And then the third part was intracellular signaling, which is what made it work in a human being. And the tumors, halved in a week, in like the most ultra-aggressive, lethal, treatment-resistant possible cancer case. This gene reprogramming that I was able to do, which many see as one of the greatest scientific advances of all time, was just removing things that were suppressing biology. If we succeed, we're going to be able to essentially restore even the worst of genetic disease mutations. This is something that affects every single person on Earth. Half the world is sick, and the other half are the family and friends of the sick.
All right, good. Well, Marc Malone, I've been looking forward to talking to you, man. I appreciate you flying into town to chat with me today. You're working on some big stuff, man, and I think that cancer's got to be one of the biggest, most important topics that we could be talking about. So that's not everything that you're working on and doing, but it's a big part of it. And if what you're doing is has a chance to help people, then this is a big deal. This is a big conversation. So why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story as well, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Matt. This is a cool setup you guys have got here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. It's awesome.
I appreciate it.
We have an alien looking at me as I have to talk about curing cancer. So that's something. So an interesting thing about this is, I didn't have any scientific background. Now, I actually did study for a little bit online at Oxford, philosophy of science, but it wasn't like a full degree program. I got some understanding of how scientific mechanisms work, but I'm basically completely self-taught. So I guess I could start right at the beginning, because maybe it makes sense if I start right at the beginning.
Let's do it, yeah.
I also want to start right at the beginning because when it comes to my wife and my son, if that was the only hardship I had faced, you could understand when I would say it's like the worst possible thing. But actually, I've experienced hardship my whole life. And I can tell you that in contrast to the other hardship, what happened with my wife and what's going to happen with my son if I don't succeed is indeed the worst possible thing. So I was born Coventry, England. My father had pretty severe mental illness, was institutionalized a couple of times. My mother had chronic sickness. She had autoimmune disease. She was bedridden for most of my childhood.
What was your dad's condition?
He had basically a severe major depression with some bipolar, but it was mostly just severe major depression.
Okay.
And he actually voluntarily, by the way, institutionalized himself. He chose to do that to try to get better. That was when I was a baby. So we were in pretty severe poverty. We lived in what's called a council estate in England, which is kind of like government housing. Welfare. There was 5 children, and we were surviving on probably the equivalent of about $250 a week. So I was surrounded by drugs. I was surrounded by violence. There is a childhood experience test called the ACE score, adverse childhood experience. I have 10 of 10, every single childhood trauma.
I think my wife has 9 out of 10.
That's intense. Yeah, it's extreme.
Yep.
So everything from like family members going to prison, suicide attempts, overdoses, drugs, poverty, violence, suicidal, abuse, neglect. And the thing is, when I say that, because I want to point out something important, which is, one, just because you were born into an environment like that doesn't mean it has to define what you become.
Right.
The other thing is, though, when I explained what happened to Jill and what happened to us and how extreme and how hard it was, I just wanted to know in contrast that it's not like I didn't know what hardship was already. So the point is that was kind of the background. And one of the hardest things about the background was when I was younger, a few people saw that they would call me gifted in quotation marks. I say that because I don't really know what that means. Maybe everyone's gifted. But they said I was gifted, but the school system never really ever gave me a shot. They didn't take me seriously because I didn't show up for school on time, because I didn't have clean clothes. I used to have to scrub my school sweater with a sponge under the sink. We didn't even have money for washing detergent sometimes. And my mother was sick when I was 10. So I'm like scrubbing my school uniform under the sink. And the school system didn't take me seriously because they were like, well, he's from some drug den, he's not, he's a lost cause. But I was always deeply interested in how the world works and how things work, whether it's on a spiritual front, a philosophical front, or a scientific front, ever since I was super young. And when I used to do those sort of like exams in school, I would get almost 100%. And even though I'd get like 100%, they still didn't put me through to any top class or anything. So I gave up on it because they gave up on me. They never gave me a chance. So I was like, wow, the establishment, the school system, education, it's not a place for me. So I completely sort of abandoned it. And then I lost my brother when I was 20, missing persons.
Wow.
And Aaron, my son is Aaron, named after Uncle Aaron. And Aaron was the most important person in my life. He was, you would have liked him and he would have liked you because he was deeply into this consciousness. He was deeply into the way that the higher reality worked. And thank God for Aaron, because Aaron was the one person that believed in me truly and got me through that sort of childhood process. And then what happened was he went missing in July 2012 and has never been seen since. His wallet, his phone, his passport, everything was in his house. He didn't run because he didn't have anything with him. He's just gone. Missing persons is a hard thing to deal with because it doesn't come with any closure.
Right.
So I was a musician in my early 20s. I loved music. I still wish I could be a musician, by the way. I love music. Unfortunately, I've been pushed to curing cancer, but one day I hope to go back to be a musician. And I was a musician in my early 20s, and then I was sort of going off the rails because Aaron had gone, and I didn't have that person to sort of like believe in me. And then I met Jill, my wife. What's interesting is she came up as a people you may know friend request or a friend suggestion on Facebook. So she came up and I saw her picture and I was like, man, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I was just captivated by just how beautiful she was. And then so I added her and we started talking. And I couldn't believe it because she was so intelligent. She was deeply spiritual, by the way. She would do juice cleanses. She had crystals and she had sage and she also had Bibles. And I was just, I just can't believe it. The most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and also the one that actually understands my idiosyncrasies in what I believe. So we started talking, we hit it off straight away. And within 6 weeks of us talking, like on Skype, back in those days when there was a Skype, this was about 10 years ago, she came to visit me in England. And the day I met her, I told her at the end of that day that this has been the greatest day of my life. And she said, mine too. We got engaged 10 days later. I moved to America 4 months later. And then we got married a year after that, once all of the immigration process and stuff had done. So what had happened is when I met Jill, she, I guess, gave me the anchoring to dig deeper and like know I'm better than what I was becoming. Because I wouldn't have been able to do any of this stuff without her. So we got married in Santa Barbara, November 17th, 2018. And then we had our children. Aaron, my son, who we'll talk about today for sure, was born on March 12th, 2020, when the world was shutting down. And that was an experience because I came out of the hospital with this baby. And in Southern California too, where it's super like, busy, a lot of people. And it was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There was like no one there. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, imagine like coming out in LA and just seeing a dead zone. It's the freakiest thing. Well, I was like, what did I bring this child into?
Right. My son was born in April of 2020. So
Oh, right. Yeah.
So COVID baby as well.
Yeah.
The only two people out in the hospital, my wife and I, in the room. And
right.
Yeah. Crazy.
It was an insane time to have a child.
Yep.
But, we didn't know that was going to happen.
Yep.
Though I still had another one, even though knowing it was happening, because then my daughter was born a year later, Iona. So we had three children.
And my birthday is one day away from your anniversary.
Is it?
Yep.
18th?
16th is my birthday.
So we met in Southern California, got married there. Aaron was born there. And then we moved to Arizona, and then we moved to South Dakota, and we kept kind of moving east towards where the freedom was, because during COVID times, places were very restrictive. My wife was from Minnesota originally, so we were basically moving close to Minnesota, but we ended up in South Dakota, where everything was like totally open the whole time, but we were close to her family. So that's kind of how that happened and how we met. And then in the late January 2023, she got diagnosed with the cancer. And it wasn't just any cancer, unfortunately. So the cancer she had is called triple negative breast cancer, which already is one of the more aggressive cancers. But on her side, she had a bunch of super rare mutations underpinning that, which we can talk a little bit about. But basically making it like an ultra lethal, ultra treatment resistant, aggressive cancer. For context, less than 1% with her cancer would survive 3 months. Wow. Even pancreatic cancer, 20% survive a year.
Yeah.
So you're looking, even conservatively, 10 times more lethal than the worst form of cancer.
Wow.
And I can explain all of the specifics of why that is, but needless to say, you're talking maximal aggression, maximal treatment resistance, already metastatic upon diagnosis. Mm. And it was crazy, because I was just kind of like, I knew looking into it very early. We spoke to some doctors. I looked at this was pre-AI. There was really no GPT or Google AI. I think GPT had just come out, but everything was still just normal Google search. And I was looking through the papers. I was looking through PubMed, NCBI. And I realized the prognosis, like conventional treatments, and frankly, even most alternative treatments, just had absolutely no chance, of working. So much so that with her specific type of cancer, they even removed her from clinical trials, because there was no response. So they were like, this group, we're basically going to exclude them from the clinical trial results. So by any metric, there was just nothing that could be done. And that's why I had to do something. And I guess that's brings us to why I had to face down pretty much the most lethal form of human disease possible.
Wow. Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. And so you guys, you were living where? Where were you guys? You moved to the U.S., and where were you living? Yeah,
so when I first moved to the U.S., we're in California.
Okay.
That's where we got married and Aaron was born. And then we moved to Arizona and South Dakota. So when this started, it was in South Dakota.
Okay. And so what's going through your mind as you get this diagnosis, and you guys are talking about it, and like you're thinking through this, like, are you thinking at that point, I've got to do something about this because the doctors are not going to do anything? I mean, when did that kind of, enter into your mind that, I've got to be the one to take charge here?
Yeah, straight away.
Yeah.
Literally the first day, which is absolutely insane, and I don't recommend anyone else do this, but I knew I had to, and I knew instinctively that I could. Can't explain that part because it makes no sense, because we are talking about pretty much the most lethal form of human disease here. But I knew I could. And I looked, and the reason that I knew I had to is because I just knew there was no shot anywhere. I knew we didn't have a shot anywhere else. So in my mind at the time, I had to kind of suppress the anticipatory grief, the pain that wanted to come up, the part of me that just simultaneously wanted to break down and also wanted to just break everything else. And I had to kind of switch into war, you know? And the reality is every day she was going through that disease, and to some degree every day now with my son, I am in a war. And I don't have the luxury of breaking down.
Right.
You know? So when she, later in the story, you know, when she passed, and we'll get there, then it broke me pretty hard. And that was a necessary, natural part of the journey.
Yep.
You know? But at that time, when there's a fight, when there is a war to fight, I'll fight it. And then I'll cry later, which is, you know, it's interesting actually, because I had a friend, a veteran, who told me the guys who come back from war with the worst PTSD are the ones that don't cry after the battlefield.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
He was like, the ones that cry after a really rough day, they've seen a really rough thing, they always come back healthier. It's the ones that bottle it all up.
Right. Yeah. It's called Relive to Relieve. I just did a podcast on this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It actually moves the traumatic incident from one part of your brain to a different part of your brain. If you go back to that incident, usually, you know, PTSD is from childhood. And so you imagine yourself as a child and you relive the event. You don't, you know, analyze it. You don't judge it. You're just there. You're just in it again, and you watch it happen. And that if you do that 4 or 5 times, you still have the memory, of course, but it makes it much less, it doesn't have a hold on you. It doesn't have a grip on you. You don't get triggered by things in your day-to-day life because of it, you know, and it's very, very powerful. But,
Right.
So
I need some of that.
Yeah. It's
sure.
it's like the only thing that works for, I mean, there's a couple of things that work for PTSD, but anyway, so what did you do then? What were your first steps in order to try and, you know, do what you could to help the situation?
Yeah. So, and this is kind of a difference of how my brain works to conventional scientists, or perhaps to a lot of different types of people. But when I first looked at her disease, and I was like, okay, again, we're doing the analog. We're not able to speed things up with AI. We have to look through Google Scholar papers, PubMed. And I'm looking through, and I'm like, there's not really any simple way to crack this disease. So what I did is I had to start drawing out, and I literally drew it out. It's like, I need to draw out a causal pathway. See, most scientists think of things consequentially and not causally. So most scientists, and this is a philosophy of science problem, that most scientists think, okay, A goes to B goes to C, right? And they go, okay, so if we can sort of pause B, we won't get equal C. Whereas I think, if I can remove A, then there is no B and C. If I can find a way to figure out what is actually generating this to begin with, what is causing this disease to take over the body at the deepest molecular level. And if I can get to that, we have a chance. Because I was like, there's no way of reactively fighting this, because we're talking a cancer where tumors are growing 1 to 2 centimeters a week.
Wow.
For contrast, typical breast cancer grows 1.7 centimeters, I think, every 18 months.
Yeah. Wow.
So like 75 times the speed, right? So
right.
There's no way of reactively winning.
Right.
Even if we had a super successful reactive treatment, like some kind of Anktiva type thing, like some kind of specialized immunotherapy, or some specialized mRNA therapy, or even some specialized chemotherapy. The reality is there's no way to reactively beat something that is this fast and that is this treatment resistant by nature. So I had to diagram out what is the deepest level that I can get to. Because if I can close the door from these cells being created, we have a chance. But I got to find a way to close the door from this thing being generated. And then we have a shot of doing it. So that was kind of the goal from day one for the whole year. It took me some months to figure out how to do that part. That was much later. But at the beginning, that was still the goal. I didn't manage it, but I did manage something perhaps even more advanced. So then I had to find compounds. I was like, okay, how can I crack this treatment-resistant shell? So let me give you a little more of that detail I didn't give earlier. There is a known, one of the most common cancer protective genes is called TP53. Okay, that's a gene that basically protects you against cancer. When it's mutated, it doesn't protect you against the cancer. So then people with a mutated TP53 often get cancer more than people without it. Her TP53 was not just mutated, it was gone, which meant there wasn't just a broken protection mechanism, there was no protection mechanism. So it was just all-out war in the cells. Then she had these things called mismatch repair genes, and these are going to be relevant for Aaron. They repair broken DNA. So inside of us, when we get sicknesses, when we get exposed to toxins, when we get exposed to pathogens, our DNA can break, and these genes repair that DNA inside of you. So the job of a DNA repair gene, especially in a cancer context, is to repair the DNA so it doesn't become what we call oncogenic cancer. Jill had a broken mismatch repair gene too, actually. So that meant that the DNA repair wasn't working either. So you had no guardian to stop it, the cancer. Then you had no DNA repair underneath it. And then you had a super high aggressive rate. So it was pretty much like the most hostile cellular territory. But what I discovered is triple negative breast cancer is characterized by silenced genes. If you imagine a cell, imagine a circle, and on top of a cell you have things called receptors. And receptors, they take in your hormones, they take in your insulin, they take in all of your energy. Every cell has a bunch of receptors, things on the top, like antenna, like taking in a signal. Necessary for the body to work, especially in things like energy, hormones, etc. So in her cancer, receptors are silenced. They're switched off. Hormonal genes don't work. So she's not getting any estrogen, progesterone, etc. So the receptors are switched off. By definition, that's what this disease is. Triple negative breast cancer means estrogen, progesterone, and HER2 receptors are switched off. So that meant her hormonal receptors at the top of the cell are not taking in hormones. They're off. That massively speeds up this aggression because, yeah, there you go. And that massively speeds up the aggression because they operate as somewhat like protective genes to slow the cancer down. That's why in typical breast cancer, where you have hormonal involvement, it's way less aggressive than triple negative breast cancer. So those genes were switched off. Now, what I was trying to do was find a way to crack into that tumor. And what I ended up doing as a journey on this byproduct was actually switching those receptors back on. So I found something in the Streptomyces family, which is used for antibiotics, which is used for antiparasitics.
What is that, fam? What is that?
Streptomyces. So that's the plant, the molecule that creates things like ivermectins, that creates antibiotics. So it's used for a lot of different antiparasitics and antibiotics.
Okay.
So in this case, what I used was a Streptomyces ivermectins, it was a sister and a form of the ivermectin. But the difference with what we did, we had to re-engineer some of this in the pharmacy. So I got the doctor and the pharmacist to re-engineer some of this to make it work. Meaning that we had to improve its delivery system, etc. So part of the thing was, number one, getting the right molecule that could crack the cancer open. Number two was to starve its energy, because cancer like this, all cancer, but especially super aggressive ones like this, are driven by, I'm trying to not go too complex, driven by glycolysis and glutaminolysis. So in other words, glutamine and glucose, more than oxygen, are used as the cell's energy. So what we call aerobic glycolysis is basically the cell is using glucose even when oxygen is present. It does that to make it more efficient. It does that because then it can replicate faster and go throughout the body. Okay, so the second part was to starve the cell of that energy. So the cancer cells couldn't keep replicating, couldn't keep pulling in that energy to become treatment resistant. And then the third part was intracellular signaling. So if you imagine inside a cell, we talked about the receptors at the top. Inside the cell, you imagine it like you have a network, like a train track. And inside the cell, you've got all these different train tracks that go to different places. And if you go across one track, the cell will live. If you go across another track, the cell will die. But I found a third track, which was the cell transformed. It didn't die, and it also didn't live. It transformed, which again wasn't really thought of to be possible. So what this meant was we had the energy part, we had the compound that could crack open the hard locked genes that were locking down those receptors. And then the third part was this intracellular signaling, which we call signal pathways. And I triggered it where it transformed the cell and those receptors and genes came back on. So the amazing thing about this is, one, no gene or receptor had ever been switched back on in a living human before, let alone two, across chromosomes, because inside the human body, we have separate chromosomes that carry maybe 100, 200 different genes. So in this case, you have chromosome 6 that has estrogen and chromosome 11 that has progesterone. These are completely different chromosome areas holding the gene, which sets a very different precedent to what gene therapies and mRNA have been doing, because that meant that we triggered receptors and genes back on in completely different chromosomes in completely different areas of the body. So because of this, we never had a gene reactivation in a living human before, certainly never two, certainly never across chromosomes. But perhaps like from an ontological standpoint, what I mean by ontological is like from a perspective of the purpose of disease, we actually reversed the purpose of the disease. You know, it's like, it's different to just curing a disease. It's like actively reversing it, because the nature of this disease is to have those things switched off. So to switch them back on and then watch the tumor shrink, in many ways, I think it's actually the first instance we've seen of cancer actively reversing, not just being killed, but reversing. Because like the purpose of this cancer is to have those genes off, they came back on, and then the tumor started to shrink. In fact, we saw one of her metastatic tumors disappear completely, and the primary best one went down 70 to 77%.
Wow.
So it was like watching an active ontological reversal, like watching an actual reversal of the nature of the disease, not just watching the disease die. So what we'd done is we transformed it by hitting these receptors back on. By the way, it has unbelievable ramifications because, of course, estrogen and progesterone are necessary for human life. Procreation. I mean, we have 1 or 2 billion, who knows how many, but anything from 1 to 2 billion infertile people in the world. Environmental exposures, you know, plastics, toxins.
Numbers increasing.
All the time.
Yep.
And it's going to be way higher in the younger generation who are exposed to this in utero and then as they've come out.
Right.
So the key to reversing a lot of those problems is exactly this, is to have the hormonal genes switched back on and working.
So they were completely off. They were at like 0%.
Undetectable.
Undetectable. And then did they come back to full strength, or did they come somewhere in between full and sleeping?
Yeah, so I probably should have mentioned that, of course, when I was doing this was all physician oversight. We, like, her disease was diagnosed by biopsy, right? So biopsy obviously said, okay, no estrogen or progesterone genes or HER2 in this tissue. They are undetectable levels. We had the biopsy from the hospital, signed by the physician and surgeon, etc. Then I did this treatment. 3 weeks later, we did another biopsy. This was a blood draw called a liquid biopsy.
Okay.
And the liquid biopsy basically detects shed tumor cells throughout the blood. So rather than pulling like the tissue from the tumor directly, it detects all of the tumor cells throughout the blood that are coming off the tumor that are spreading throughout the body. And then it analyzes the tumor cells through the blood. Okay, so a liquid biopsy is very common in standard oncological care because you can't do tissue biopsies every week, right? You would traumatize the patient, it's too expensive, and of course, you could cause the cancer to get worse. So liquid biopsies are standard of care procedure. And what they do is they monitor where the cancer is in the blood. So 3 weeks after we did the initial biopsy, we got the liquid biopsy, which showed estrogen and progesterone had come back on. So 15% progesterone and 25% estrogen, which was equivalent to what most of the other genes were expressing in the biopsy. So when we look at the panel, I have the panel in the paper, but when you look at the whole panel of other genes, it's equivalent to, because the genes are never like 100% expression really, because they're especially in tumor tissue. So yeah, basically that's a 2,500% increase, like from undetectable to 25%. And what's interesting is even if we were to look at the fact that one is tissue and one is liquid, if there's some like measuring discrepancy, because there will be some measuring discrepancy between a physical and a blood one, the measuring discrepancy would be at most 100%. So 1 or 2%, not 2,500% or 25%, right? So maybe if we'd done it from the tissue, it would have been 20% expression, not 25%, is what I'm trying to say. But the discrepancy between liquid and physical is nowhere near 25 times the difference, is what I'm saying. Right. So even if the expression difference there was a discrepancy there, it really wouldn't have changed the outcome at all. Okay. Yeah, the outcome is still the same. I remember when the doctor read that to us, and he was like, you do have estrogen and progesterone genes. And then Jill was like so confused. She was like, what? And I was like, I knew that was going to happen because I was reading in the paper when I put together this treatment that there was these locks I was unbreaking, SYN3-HDAC, could switch those receptors back on. But I didn't know it was actually possible in a human. This was in a mouse. But I did know it could have happened, and it actually happened. So if you think about like a chromosome, like you've got these layers like of coating. It's like literally think of it like clothing. And the layer on top of a chromosome, it's like holding all the genes and protecting them and holding them in place. That's like this SYN3 part. That's basically a part that is holding genes in place across thousands of genes in the genome. And then underneath that, you had this HDAC part. And that's locks underneath the material. So it's like having another layer underneath the clothes. And those layers are to protect the genes because we need them protected because we're exposed to viruses and bacteria and toxins. So it's a natural part of biology of the genome for these genes to be protected, of course. But in cases like many diseases, and not just this, 1 billion or more people's diseases, neurodegeneration, some Parkinson's, some Alzheimer's, some autism, those genes are switched off. It's no longer protective. The control system has tightened them too much and they don't work. Okay. But for the other 7 billion people, that layer is protective. But for some, it's enforcing too much protection. So what we did is we opened that back up. And I mean, I knew some parts of it had been done preclinically, but they'd never been able to figure out how to do anything like this in a human. And the reason that I was is because they only had one piece. They had that SYN3-HDAC piece, but there was a metabolic piece and there was an intracellular signaling piece that I built with it, which is what made it work in a human being. So the thing is with most science, goes back to most conventional scientists, they view the genome, they view humans kind of like we're like a machine. So they think, okay, if we just go in and break the gene and edit it, the person's going to be fixed. And that can happen sometimes. But biology, like the genes aren't like isolated. They're part of a communication system. Like your metabolism is communicating to these genes and your hormones are communicating to these genes. And it's just like everything within the biology is actually connected and aware of everything else. And the problem is when we look at humans like a neutral machine, we're going to miss the point.
Right.
That's not how this works.
This screw and everything will be fine.
That's right. But it's not how it works because, of course, everything is connected to everything else. Blood flow is connected to insulin, which is connected to hormones, which is connected to sleep, which is connected to stress, which is connected to glyphosate. And everything here is in an interconnected web. So the reason I was able to do this gene reprogramming was because I realized that biology can only be solved if we change the conditions, not just go in and break something and fix it. Instead, I changed the cellular conditions with different molecules and targets to allow the genome to re-express itself. Like, all I did is remove locks. So when I went through that whole thing, the Syn3H stack, the metabolism, just think of it as all I'm doing is removing blocks. I'm removing locks. I'm removing metabolic pressure. But all I did is remove stuff. The genome itself is what restored itself. I just removed the blocks. It's a little bit like the Constitution. I know that might sound like a weird segue, but I promise it's going somewhere. So if you think about the Constitution, why it works so well, it's via negativa. So our law, and English common law too, English common law, the American legal system, but the Constitution really enshrined that common law. That's why it's better. But it's a via negativa process. So the way it works is, rather than like European Union law, which is why I voted to leave the European Union, EU law it compels you to do something. It says you must do X, Y, or Z. Whereas English common law, particularly in constitutional form, doesn't compel you to do something. It says what you can't do. And then everything else you can choose to do for yourself. So it says you can't invade someone's privacy. You can't take someone's property. You can't take someone's right to self-defense or their right to speech or belief. But as long as you don't take those things from people, you can do whatever you want. Right. That's a completely different methodology to saying you must do X, Y, Z for society to function. Instead, it's like, just don't do these 10 things in the Bill of Rights. Just don't take these 10 things from people and society will function fine. And honestly, this is a micro-macro thing. It works at every level of reality the same way. This gene reprogramming that I was able to do, which many see as one of the greatest scientific advances of all time, was just removing things that were suppressing biology. It was the same approach as what we do in our legal system. It was to say, if we just remove the things that are oppressing us, life takes care of itself. Life expresses itself correctly.
It balances, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really, and I see it in every area of life. The pattern is the same. Rather than trying to compel reality to conform to what I think, it's better to just try to remove the things that are suppressing us and life takes care of itself. In the same way, it's like the difference between philosophy and ideology is that ideology is like me trying to bend reality to my will. And philosophy is you trying to bend your will towards reality, And I think the goal of good scientists and philosophers and thinkers and humans is how can we best match reality with the right intention rather than trying to bend reality towards us. So right. That's largely how we did that. And then that happened in the first month and things were looking really good because the tumors were going down rapidly. And she was in awesome health. She was getting better. The problem is I couldn't sustain the gene reprogramming. And the reason I couldn't sustain it is because back then, this was 3.5 years ago, I didn't know how to get that metabolic starvation just in cancer cells. So I couldn't maintain it because I was starving her too. So after a month of doing it, I couldn't do it anymore. Because I was like, any way whether it's fasting, whether it's a drug or a molecule, there's no way to separate the starvation from her and the tumors.
Right.
Now, I have figured this out since, but it took me 3 years. I had just started it back then, so I didn't have the answer for that back then. So without that metabolic part of what I called the triune system, those three things, the gene reprogramming couldn't sustain, which meant I couldn't sustain the cancer reversal, also couldn't sustain the receptors being back on. So we had the proof of concept, we had the tumors eradicated, we had the genes back on, but after that point, she started to decline again because I couldn't sustain it. I didn't know how to starve isolated tissue in the body, which is what cancer is, right? It's like isolated tissue. I didn't know how to do it without starving her. So after a month, the cancer started rapidly growing again.
Okay. Yeah, let me ask a question
Yes.
first before we continue on this
Sure.
track. What this all happened within a month of the diagnosis. Is
Yes,
that right?
the gene reprogramming happened in the first month. Yep.
So what was your prior knowledge to genetics and all this medical stuff, coming into this? I mean, you're self-taught, obviously, right?
Yep,
So
self-taught.
when did you begin, when did you start to learn enough to be able to even have enough, information and intelligence to be able to go down this path?
So I guess I did do some very deep dives into biology the 3 years prior when COVID started,
Okay.
but not cancer. So I did start to understand. I spent a couple of years deeply understanding some biology, but I didn't really understand cancer. And then I had to apply some of that baseline understanding to cancer when this happened. The truth is that the vast majority of this understanding came exactly as it was happening at the time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're a fast learner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I have had to be. I've had to be. It's kind of it's an interesting thing though, because I tell you, there's something else going on here. And this isn't me coming out as a cult leader and saying that I'm like spiritually divine and you should follow me or anything like that.
Everyone's spiritually divine.
Right. But what I mean by something else going on is that there was an instinct put in me. Man, the academics are going to take this and say I'm insane, but there was an instinct on that first day that was put in me that gave me the first step of where I needed to go.
Nice.
So this metabolic thing is a prime example.
What was the instinct? What did that feel like?
It literally, I sat down on my computer. I realized how bad the situation was. I realized no treatments were going to work for her. And then based on that earlier viral research I did and all the biology for the prior years, I remember thinking, there was a viral protein replication inhibitor, 2-deoxyglucose, which by the way, I discovered for COVID back in April 2020. And then the Indian government and all the big science journals figured it out 18 months later, 2-deoxyglucose. Basically, it hijacks the viral replication system and breaks it down. It's like a fake glucose mimic that goes into the system. And then the viral attaches to it as an energy source, but it's not real, so it breaks the virus down. So it's a really clever way, because viruses, like cancer, hijack our metabolism. But cancer's way worse because it's got the whole of human evolution behind it. A virus is a dead entity, but cancer is living and has the intelligence of human cells. Anyway, I digress. So that instinct was tied to 3 years earlier when I started looking at COVID, where I was like, viral protein replication inhibitor. I remember 2-deoxyglucose that I discovered to start using for COVID back in April 2020 also had some use in cancer. So that was the first moment I remembered, okay, so then if I can find something, so then I was like, so what's the most effective protein replication inhibitor in viruses? Maybe that will work for cancer. And that's what brought me to the Streptomyces family, these ivermectins, these antibiotics. And then from there, I looked at the cancer papers and I was like, yeah, this is it. These actually can. So it was like a chain of thought like that. And that all happened in the space of a couple of hours.
Okay.
But the metabolic part was just like given to me. Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College, he's done a lot of deep work on cancer as a mitochondrial disease. Now, he's not correct fully that it's a mitochondrial disease, but he's correct that it is largely a metabolic disease, but it is also a genetic disease. Again, everything's intercommunicating. It's not one or the other. It's the whole system. But I love his work. I appreciate him a lot. His video came up on YouTube the day of diagnosis and taught me that cancer was driven by glutamine and glucose, like the day of the scan. Had that not happened, this triune system would never have happened, because this metabolic part was 1/3 of that system.
Right. Wow.
So some of it was like serendipity. Some of it was building off prior knowledge, but there was a lot of things that had to come together super fast for this to work. And it was a bit like a download, There was a bit of a download there. Now, with the functional cancer cure part, where we eliminated the cancer stem cell pathways later in Jill's journey, and that's actually much more closer to a cancer cure than this. That was not that was fully me. But the gene reprogramming was like partly just dropped in, parts of it were dropped in my lap, you know?
Yep.
So that was the first month, but I couldn't sustain it. So then she started getting sicker again. We tried a bunch of things. We did, we did surgeries, we did immunotherapy. None of it was working. And Jill was a good candidate for immunotherapy. She had PD-L1 expression, which meant it should work. It literally did nothing, like literally nothing. Didn't even buy a day. So she started to decline. She had this surgery on the breast. They took the tumor. The cancer was so aggressive that the tumors all grew back within a couple of weeks, like 5 tumors where the breast used to be. Because she was losing so much weight, they couldn't skin graft. So I had to clean her wounds with these open tumors on her rib cage.
Wow.
Every day. Jill was like my height, like 5'10", and she was a tall woman. And she was dropping down to like 80 pounds. The cancer, the cachexia, was like sucking away all of the nutrients and the life force. So they couldn't do a skin graft. So where they used to have the tumor, she had all these like little tumors popping up, and she had 5 of them there on the breast. And I used to clean it with saline and put bandages on her every day. And she would scream in pain. Mm. I used to administer her morphine, and
yeah, sorry. Take your time. That's tough.
Yeah. So the children were 0, 1, and 3. And she was rapidly declining. And at this point, I couldn't even do the gene reprogramming again because she was, I would have starved her before I starved the cancer. It would have just killed her faster. And I didn't know how to make this more targeted back then, and I failed. But I had to do the wound cleaning, take care of the babies. They were babies then. I've raised them myself now, but we had some support came in so I could focus back on the research. There was a couple of months there where I had to just be like full caregiving of her and the children. And then we went to Arizona to try to do some genetically targeted chemotherapies and immunotherapies and a bunch of natural treatments, IVs, like things that have good clinical efficacy. There's a lot of natural treatments that have clinical efficacy. The problem isn't the natural. So this is where conventional scientists and naturopath type people talk over each other, because they're both looking at different parts of the same picture. A lot of the naturopath types will say, look, there's this study. I've got papers here with resveratrol for cancer. Resveratrol is an amazing molecule to fight cancer. The problem isn't, so then conventional scientists will say, there's no human proof of that. It's all like labs and it's all just like anecdotes. The reason that the resveratrol doesn't work when we apply it to mass cancer cases is because of bioavailability. The problem is that natural molecules, they do work, but only about 3% of it actually reaches the cancer. That's the problem. We're not able to, at least we weren't until I started doing this work, but I've figured out largely how to do this, how to transport these powerful molecules to where the disease actually is, because that's really the biggest stumbling block. So you have two people where the oncologist is correct that if you try to just do resveratrol IVs or curcumin or whatever for like all of these struggling cancer patients, there's a chance that it's not going to work for most of them. But the person who sees why it could work, the naturopath, They're seeing something clearly. What they're seeing is true. It's just those two systems never came together to figure out how to actually take those molecules and make them effective agents. That's the problem. Because I saw this in Jill's case too. We did a lot of natural IV treatments with her genetically targeted chemotherapy. So they took chemotherapy specifically that matched her tumor markers. Couldn't have been more precise. Not only did it not help her, her cancer grew faster during that treatment. We did everything. We did hundreds of treatments. I'm talking every repurposed drug, fenbendazole, mebendazole, metformin, every IV, vitamin C, resveratrol, curcumin, chemotherapies, many different types, immunotherapies, surgeries. Jill got worse through all of it. Her cancer was unstoppable. It just blasted through all of it. We had the weekly biopsies throughout treatment. I've got all the records, of course, and some of them are in the paper. And you can see the mutations just growing and getting angrier through the treatment, like it's an upward trajectory.
How do you mean? What is that?
So in those liquid biopsies, they sequence for specific like mutations, like tumor mutations. And we see if they're going up in the blood or going down.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So it's called a VAF, an allele fraction. So what we do is allele frequency. So what we do is we see, is this gene going up or down? Because that kind of indicates to us whether the treatment is working. And through all of Jill's treatments, aside from the triune gene reprogramming right at the beginning, up until this point, where we'd done all of these treatments, her tumors were growing every week. So cancer was proliferating more, basically. It was getting through more of the body, more of the blood, more organs, and even right to the tumor mutations themselves, they were just getting stronger. Yeah. So we were now at the place where it was like very obvious that she was going to die soon.
And how far along after the diagnosis?
Yeah, so at this point it was by now we're at August 2023, so it had been 8 months.
8 months. And what was the original estimate from the doctors?
Well, basically with her type of cancer, she should have been dead in 3 months. Yeah, now the gene reprogramming gave her a triple lifespan because in that first month, I reversed the cancer significantly to buy us months of life that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Right.
Especially after going through all these other treatments and seeing it just completely fail.
Right. So you can't say that you failed. You can't say, I mean, you bought her, you extended her life by at least 5 months. And, I mean.
Yeah, we converted 3 months to basically a year.
Yeah. And not that it's your responsibility anyway, and not that you should bear any, responsibility for anything that occurred, but you won. You extended her life, and you potentially developed something that could help a lot more people. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's funny you say this because I was watching this cancer convention, a bunch of oncologists with this pancreatic cancer drug. I know how it helped pancreatic cancer patients live some 6 to 12 months longer, and they were all kind of gave themselves a standing ovation for it. And my gene reprogramming did more than that in a harder case. But I'm like, what is 6 to 12 months though, and she's still gone? And that's how it feels. Though it's not accurate because every day meant the world, really. Every extra day counts. But there's a part of us, and I know there's a lot of parts of other perhaps widowed parents, perhaps parents with kids that have died or sick, that can feel that like anger and bitterness at the fact like what is 6 to 12 months, when my person is still gone. But I do also have to remember that had I not given her that time, she would have missed all of the baby's birthdays. She caught all of their birthdays that year.
Nice.
Because I did that at the beginning.
Yeah. It's incredible.
So she was at this point, though, like at hospice phase, August 23. And I'd spent the whole year, going back to the beginning of our conversation, I'd spent the whole year trying to figure out how to close that door on the cancer growth. The gene reprogramming wasn't it. What I had to do was shut down cancer stem cells. So we know about stem cells because they obviously create like tissue, they rejuvenate parts of our body. But the doorways that create stem cells also create cancer stem cells. So the trick is, how do you shut down cancer stem cells without shutting down healthy stem cells?
Okay.
Which means if we shut down all stem cells, you're gonna really hurt the human, gonna damage the tissue, the gastrointestinal system, because you're stopping cells from being able to regenerate. But if you don't shut down cancer stem cells, you can't really ever cure cancer. Everything is always reactive. Everything is always killing something after it's created. If we truly want to cure cancer, we have to shut down the origin point. And this is the origin point. So I'd been working the whole year at that point on trying to do this very thing. This was my original goal. The gene reprogramming is actually a bigger scientific advance, really, because it goes way beyond cancer. In fact, cancer is the worst application for the gene reprogramming because cancer is a disease of proliferation, right? It's a disease where cells are created and it takes over the body. Gene reprogramming would really be best in everything else, where the genetic disease is static, where you're not trying to kill tissue, you're trying to transform it. Like you have a severely disabled child, you have someone with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or something. There, where you're reprogramming the gene, you're going to create the necessary conditions to reverse the disease. But in cancer, you still have to kill those cells and tissue. So cancer is actually the least efficient place to have done gene reprogramming. It's actually the hardest place. If it works there, it's going to work much easier in a lot of other places.
Okay.
With further development. I've still got a lot of tweaks, but the most efficient way to cure cancer was this cancer stem cell thing. Because if you shut that down, you don't even need to reprogram genes. You're not getting any cancer cells created. And I finally figured it out, but she was at hospice phase. So what happened in August 2023 is I was like, okay, I found this old tapeworm drug, which was approved in 1982 by the FDA for gastrointestinal tapeworms. It was called niclosamide. And it hasn't been commercially available for 30 years. They didn't take it off the market because it was unsafe. It was FDA approved, known safety profile. They took it off because it was commercially just not very successful. Better antiparasitics had come out. Praziquantel, for example. But I realized, and there were papers from Stanford and Harvard scientists that were talking about niclosamide analogs, we'll call them. And those are core drug components of niclosamide, this old tapeworm drug. And the Stanford and Harvard scientists, many of which, by the way, have reached out to me directly and endorsed my paper and everything we're talking about. They were like, how come the problem with niclosamide goes back to what I was mentioning about resveratrol. It wasn't bioavailable. It was like the perfect drug core to stop all this cancer, but they could never get it to work properly. I figured out how to make it work. So what I did is I took the chemistry of the core compound. I worked with Jill's oncologist, and I could only find one pharmacy in the whole country that would do it, but I found a pharmacy based on the oncologist prescription to make. We re-engineered the niclosamide because, of course, the niclosamide as it's available obviously wasn't working, but it had something in it that would work. So we re-engineered it, basically half an entirely new drug.
How did you re-engineer it?
So we basically had to improve its delivery system. So we basically, in the pharmacy process, we had to create things to make that drug travel through the body better. Okay. So we had to add in different ways of making it bioavailable. We did. And unbelievably, in that weekly biopsy that came back after weeks of it going up, those cancer stem cell paths were completely eliminated. Gone, dropped off from the blood completely. And the tumors halved in a week.
Wow.
In like the most ultra aggressive, lethal, treatment resistant possible cancer case.
This is undisputed results.
Yeah, so Tempest Labs, for those that want to go look at my paper, you'll see it's from Tempest Labs, which is the #1 oncology lab in America. If you, not you, but if someone has cancer today and you go to your oncologist, your liquid biopsies are going to come from Tempest Labs just like mine.
Okay.
It is the gold standard used by all oncologists across America. Yeah. So it's like you could not ask for better independent verification because it's the one your oncologist uses. I was a husband. I had to use the things that everyone else has to use. My data had to come from the same system that everyone else's came from. I didn't have a private lab and that's the wonderful part about this story is that all of this is so independent. Like, not only was there a step between me and the doctor, there was a step between me and the doctor and the lab. And all of these are independent steps. The doctor verified my thinking and my therapy, and then the lab verified his sending for the results based on my therapy. So we have multiple points of independence. On top of that, like, these liquid biopsies are signed by multiple doctors, not just the oncologist, but there's a medical doctor and a PhD, et cetera, all doing it in the facility. So we're talking multiple medical doctors involved in just one step of data verification. It really is as objective as could possibly be. Far more than most case studies that are published, because those are usually coming from doctors who have written them directly and usually coming from labs that like their own hospital. Whereas me, I wrote it, a doctor was in between, and then the lab was completely separate from the doctor and from me. So we have way more steps of independence and verification here. We also have, during this cancer stem cell elimination part, we have a hospital, the surgery, Ki-67 went down. So the Ki-67 is how fast cancer cells replicate. That was down. We have circulating tumor cells, the cells in the blood that are being shed. That came down. Hospital, CTCs, and the tumors and cancer stem cells were all 3 separate labs, all at the same time. So all showing everything going down.
Nice.
So it's as robust as could possibly be.
Okay.
And the most amazing part about this, though, was that I finally got to the core engine of what made cancer work in every cancer, not just yours. See, those tumors, like those receptors and stuff we were talking about, that's specific to this cancer. But the cancer stem cell pathways is every cancer. Yeah, doesn't matter if it's glioblastoma, colon, pancreatic, breast. All cancer uses these pathways to generate. So if we are able to cut the regenerative engine at the root, this truly is the closest to a cancer cure proven in a human that we've ever had, because it's the only thing that can universally apply to all cancers. That isn't just dependent on a specific type. Now, I want to be clear that it wouldn't be in of itself a full cancer cure. It is cutting the cutting the regenerative engine of cancer. So what that means is we're not eliminating all cancer for everyone with this treatment. What we're doing is putting the cancer in stasis. We're eliminating the cancer's ability to metastasize, to grow, to spread, and to keep coming back. So it's much more equivalent to think of it like a diabetes treatment that keeps insulin in check. You can live a pretty functional, normal life. And I know there's better ways to do this, but what I'm just, as an example, think of the cancer stem cell elimination not like an absolute cure, which it isn't, but a way to keep cancer paused. Yeah. So then you have time. You could chip away at the tumor with all sorts of things for months, years, because we've removed the ability for it to spread and keep coming back. So really, I would see the cancer stem cell elimination as the foundation. If we can reproduce it and take these molecules, make sure they're still safe, reproduce it across cancer patients, then it would be the foundation really of all cancer treatment, whether you have pancreatic or not, because this removes that doorway that allows these cancers to be created. And then each cancer type will have specific things that help them on top of this. So I would really view this as like an adjunct to kind of be the baseline underneath all those specialized treatments for those specialized cancer types. Yeah, so they're still going to need their other things, but this is the key to giving them many years of life while those other things work. In other words, I think this drug, if I can do it the same way or improve it from what I did before, it would make all the other treatments actually finally work. Yeah. Especially in these treatment-resistant cases, because of like 50 million cancer patients a year, 90% of the deaths are treatment resistance. And that's this cancer stem cell problem. The cells keep coming back. If we eliminate that, we've got time. Because one thing that Jill's case showed me is time is the biggest enemy. You know, I finally figured it out. If I'd done this part at the beginning, she'd be alive, because I would have been able to eliminate the super fast growth and eliminate the cancer's ability to keep growing back like it did on the breast. And then we would have had time to chip away at those tumors. If I'd done this 6 months earlier, she'd likely be alive.
So this process and the technique would work for anybody, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yes, it would, because
My aunt died of pancreatic cancer a number of years ago, and you mentioned Alzheimer's before. My dad has that right now, so
he does.
He's in late stages on
I'm sorry.
Alzheimer's. So yeah, it's tough for everybody. Both diseases are miserable.
For different reasons, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's little more miserable, I think, than watching someone you love much degrade like that.
Right.
Right.
You
know, the key to the Alzheimer's and all of the genetic diseases at large is really my son, which we'll come to, I guess, more than Jill's case. My son is really the key to those problems. Jill, though, did prove that it was possible for us to change gene expression without hacking up the genome and editing it, you know? So, and that's the most profound part of the gene reprogramming, is that actually they didn't know it was possible to change gene expression like this, especially genes that are completely undetectable. Right. To switch them back on with molecules, they thought that would be like, you know, woo-woo kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But here we are. It is possible. And that's the most important part about what she gave us. But as far as cancer specifically, this cancer stem cell elimination drug that I need to develop is really the key to cancer specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. This is, the gene reprogramming is the key to everything else. But the cancer stem cell elimination drug, if I'd done it early, if I'd reversed them and done the cancer stem cell at the beginning, she'd be alive.
Have you published any papers on this? Yeah.
Yeah, this paper's published.
This one's published.
Yep, everything we discussed.
Okay.
Yep. It's so the thing is
peer reviewed?
Yes, well, by the doctors openly, not in a journal. This is the one. So this is on ResearchGate. And then the reason that we didn't... Now, actually, I haven't resubmitted this to a journal recently. So ResearchGate is like an academic platform where we have papers. Okay. And this is in Google Scholar.
Do you want your email address on the episode?
Yeah, that's fine. Right. So this was peer-reviewed openly. So, for example, I had Dr. Erin Greer from Mayo Clinic peer review this after I published it. It just wasn't peer-reviewed in a journal. And the reason it's not in a journal is because they wouldn't accept it, because I did a human case without a review board approving it.
Okay. Gotcha.
As if I had time for a review board while my wife is dying.
Right.
You know,
right.
But that's the law. Like most of these, not the law, they're regulations. So when I submitted this to multiple journals, they kept bouncing it back by saying any human study needs to be approved by a review board. And I was like, I mean, where do I even begin with that? As if I had time, as if it even is necessary ethically, right, when it happened to us.
Right.
But that's part of the thing. Then there were other journals which wouldn't even let me submit it because I didn't have a .edu email.
Wow.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is finding doctors independently to peer review it after I wrote it.
Okay.
And then so there were a couple of doctors. There were 4 in total, actually. But Dr. Greer is the only one that has allowed me to talk about her publicly. That's why I focus on her. She she's a precision oncologist, but she was a doctor at Mayo.
Okay.
So, yeah. But honestly, it's been open peer reviewed. I mean, gosh, thousands of scientists have read the paper. Some hate me for it. Some love me for it. You know.
What is the hate that you get? What's the pushback or the skepticism or whatever? What are they pushing back on?
Yeah. Well, it depends on which layer of analysis we're looking at. You know, from the perspective of, if I'm going to give them credit, they're pushing back on the fact that these results were such a narrow window that we didn't get to view them consistently. So their primary skepticism is it's too much of a fluctuating result, like one snapshot here, one snapshot there. That doesn't really tell us much, is their kind of primary skepticism. Their other things are like the difference between liquid and tissue, but I've already addressed that. The differential there is minimal. But the snapshot part, that only works if you're not taking into account that we had weekly results prior to my interventions, where the tumors were going up. So then I'm now supposed to believe that my one intervention where everything completely disappeared is what? Not because of my intervention?
Right.
Then why was it going up through all the other treatments every week? So it's kind of silly, to be honest, especially because if these scientists are truly serious, they would know that I'm basing this targeting on known molecular oncology, based on known drug compounds that target these areas, based on papers from Stanford and Harvard.
Right.
You know?
Right. And
they're just not happy that it was a father outside of the system who did what their Nobel Prize winners haven't done. That's the truth. But as I tell people all the time, if you're angry that I surpassed your Nobel winner, then you're thinking through the wrong lens. I lost. I didn't win, I lost. Give me back Jill and you take the results. I'd happily do that. You take the gene reprogramming and give me back my wife.
Right.
I didn't win, I lost.
Yeah.
The problem is they're looking through the lens of thinking that because I did something that is so advanced that they're trying to like take it away from me. It's like, there's nothing to take. I already lost.
So what is it that needs to occur in order to push this to the next level, to be able to make progress, to be able to show that this can happen in more than this case and that progress can be made and that this is an effective treatment?
Yeah. So we need investors to fund a patient program for the cancer treatment specifically, the gene reprogramming as well. But I need to do more like real deep work on the gene reprogramming, like more like the cancer one. We could start with patients like today. The gene reprogramming, I need to run through some preclinical first because I need to make sure that the updates I'm making are gonna work. Needless to say, I had conversations with many investors. I had one guy in the UAE who was worth 64 billion who wanted to move me out there, but they would own the intellectual property. And I was like, I cannot hand over the keys of the genome and a cure for cancer to someone that we could not possibly. I believe from a spiritual perspective, I was landed with this because I understand the cost of it. I understand the emotional cost. I understand the price that has to be paid for doing something like this. And I understand how to steward it because I have lived the worst of it that other people have to live. I don't want to keep the intellectual property to myself because I want to be a trillionaire. We have to steward this properly. We can't push out a cancer drug that could save 10 million lives a year and sell it for $1 million or whatever other issue, or even worse, put it in a box away somewhere, you know? So the problem is that I had investors come in, some were great, some were not, but nothing mission aligned. So I'm still hoping that we'll find our mission aligned investor for the patient program, but we haven't found one yet.
So what does that ideal situation look like from an investor standpoint for you?
So the investor would come in, they'd own a piece of the therapy, right? So they'd have like their piece of equity in the company. They'd have a piece of the therapy. We would do a small patient program. A dozen, 2 dozen people, treatment-resistant cancers. We could do it as part of conventional care. So the goal of this is to make the conventional care work, like I mentioned earlier. So from a legal and ethical standpoint, it's completely flawless because we're not pulling them away from anything they're doing. We're just going to go in and make their treatments fully work as an adjunct. So it's perfect. And honestly, we'll save millions of lives per year if we can pull it off. So it's a small patient program. I have a clinic, I have a doctor's, just didn't have the funds yet. Yeah. So that now in the gene reprogramming, much more important, but I realized that the original version I created in Jill's case won't work because of that whole energy problem I mentioned. So my son has been the key to figuring out how to surpass that. So Jill's legacy is going to be, we cure cancer. My son's legacy is everything else, you know, everything genetic really. So the problem with the gene reprogramming is we are nowhere near as ready as we are with cancer. We could run through the cancer as soon as possible, you know. So that's the situation. So that's why we haven't been able to move forward faster. And I'm still waiting. Yeah.
And what type of funding? I mean, how much funding do you need in order to, you know, be able to make the type of progress that you want to make?
Honestly, we could do 12 patients for like 5 million, which given we've already got a human proof of concept is super cheap and conservative because most human proof of concept like this is usually like series C or D. And I did all of that myself. So, yeah, it wouldn't be big bucks. At least that's why I wanted to focus on like 12 patients. Because then once we can reproduce it through 12, then it's like, okay, now we can do big. We know it's going to work across 100. So we can do big investment. But I was just kind of going for a smaller initial investment to make sure that it works. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. So, yeah, how old are your kids today?
Yes, mine and Jill's 3. So it's 4, 5, and 6. Okay. And the 6-year-old, 6.5, Aaron will be now, is now the center of our story.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to maybe take a break and come back and pick up the story there and finish off on the second half, discussing kind of next? Yeah, good. Okay, we'll take a quick break. I think we just pick it right back up. I think we were going to kind of start off going into your next mission, which involves your son, right?
Right.
Yeah. So how do you want to kick? You go ahead, dive right into it.
Yeah. So Jill and I had 3 children, and the youngest, Sky, has severe autism. Like nonverbal, like very low functioning behaviors, super like sensory processing issues, like sleep disruption, eating issues, like really severe level of disability. Aaron, my son, the oldest of the 3, he has all those and so much more. So I noticed about 2 years ago, I started a year after Jill died, because it took me some months to even look at this stuff. I was just like, just emotionally devastated, you know? I actually got like physical heart problems. Like I got a literal broken heart. So I had to wear this like beeper. They scanned my heart for 2 days. I got diagnosed with ventricular and atrial depolarization, so heart contraction issues, which happened the day after Jill died. No heart problems ever. No genetic heart problems in the family. It literally happened the day after she died. So I got this heart issue, and I was in really bad shape. I couldn't eat. I didn't eat for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I dropped down to like 115 pounds.
Jeez. How tall are you?
5'10".
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is it all happened in just the first few weeks after she died. So it hit me really hard, really fast. And then I realized, because I had these small children, that I had to find a way to live. I had to find a way to survive. I somehow kind of pulled through it all, kind of what we talked about at the beginning, I realized that I had to feel the emotion. I had to feel the pain. The only way out was through.
Right.
Reminds me of what Jung said, the in filth it will be found, is something that Carl Jung said. What you need most is where you least want to look. The irony and the seeming paradox is the healing had to come through allowing myself to be broken, right? So after I just let the sadness come. This was about 6 weeks after she died, and it was like Christmas Eve, 2023. And it was like the worst moment of my life because the reality hit, and I'm like here with babies on Christmas, and it's just me. And it just like floods of tears came through, and they didn't stop for many months. But then in that journey, I started to be able to eat again, and I started to be able to, my heart problems started to get better as the emotion could work itself through, And then I realized that the whole point was that I had to feel the thing that I really didn't want to feel, the reality of what happened.
Right.
What is interesting is I didn't know, we were talking about it before, about the cancer stem cell elimination. I didn't even know we'd done that until 2 years later. I had the medical records, but because Jill was at hospice phase, I wasn't actually looking at the medical records anymore. It was at this weird transition point where I had this last attempt at therapy, and then she was in hospice and just declining, and I wasn't actually checking the records. We had them. The doctor would send them to me every week. And then as I was writing the paper 2 years later, I had to go back through the records to write the paper and make sure, of course, it was accurate. And that's when I saw that I'd done what I'd been intending to do that whole time. It was still too late to save her. It wouldn't have mattered had I known at that point, because her body had been completely destroyed. But it just kind of goes to show that even like curing cancer functionally, meaning putting it in stasis, it wasn't even on my mind anymore. At that point, I was just a grieving husband and father. So about a year of deep grief that frankly would have lasted a lifetime had I not let the tears come through. But because I let them come through so consistently, I managed to move a lot in a year. And then I started to work on the severe autism for my children and started looking at how I can convert some of this gene reprogramming to reversing that, because only about 20 or 30% of autism is actually genetic. Now, the hospital, Sanford Hospital, big hospital in the Midwest, where I live, they said that only 20% of their children who have diagnosed autism come back with autism genetics.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the thing is, and on the wider level, I think it might be more like 30%, but most of it is not genetic as most people think of genetic. Most people think of genetic as DNA. So if you think of the DNA helix at the core of a gene, and then over the core of the gene, you have RNA, you have protein, you have histones, et cetera, et cetera. You have all of these layers on top of the DNA, and all of those layers combined are what make a gene. So the DNA is just the bars, the nucleotides at the center, but the gene is actually all of the material on top. So if we think about that 20% of autistic children, like my children, they have it at the DNA level. Whereas the other autistic children, they will have genetic components, but they won't be at the DNA level. So they'll have pieces on top of that DNA, such as that gene silencing, those genes being tight. But as I kind of demonstrated there in Jill's case, we can switch those back on without changing DNA. So for the vast majority of autism, we can reverse that completely with developing this further. At the DNA level, it's tricky. Now, what I'd done is look at how I can convert this for my children. But then I did the genome sequence for my son to find out, okay, so if I'm going to target and try to reprogram gene expression, I need to know exactly where the genes are coming from, because autism is honestly one of the most complex disorders and diseases. It's very heterogeneous, which means it can come from dozens of genes, and it involves an entire network within biology. It's metabolism, it's biochemical, it's genetic, it's everything. It is an extremely complex system. So I did the whole genome sequence on Aaron, and then we went to the hospital for his genetic testing and stuff. But what I realized is that Aaron his vision started to go. He was like losing his eyesight slowly. He was having problems with his ears. He's nonverbal either, so he can't communicate to me what is happening. But he's like constantly trying to do this, and we had his vision tested. His vision is going. He's obviously having hearing issues. His gastrointestinal system started to slow down, like it just wasn't working well anymore. And then what I realized is that Aaron had a number of very severe genetic problems, not just autism, but honestly, I've never heard of or seen anything like it. Aaron has hundreds of genetic mutations. Even if we take Jill's like ultra lethal cancer, she had half a dozen, maybe let's say 5 inherited mutations that kind of underpinned her ultra lethal cancer. Aaron has 4 times what Jill had. Wow. From birth.
Wow.
What it's called in, if we kind of take all of Aaron's different genetics, we have a couple of different conditions. There's really nothing like it, because I explained, I think in one of the news articles, like it was Benzinger, I think, or something, but I explained it in that to the journalist there, that Aaron has a collapsing genome. You can't really think of Aaron as a disease. It's just that there's so many structural weak places that the architecture of the genome itself just can't hold. Because some genes are more critical for function than others. And he has broken genes in so many functioning areas that he's not really going to die of one disease. He's going to die of a dozen as they're all starting to cave in on themselves. The pressure cannot maintain it. Now, to make it kind of simpler for people, there are very, very rare, like 1 in a million terminal conditions in children that are pre-cancer. There's one called CMMRD, child mismatch repair deficiency. And I talked about mismatch repair genes in Jill's case. What it means is that children who inherit these mismatch repair genes that repair DNA, they're missing them or they're broken. So they are guaranteed a pediatric cancer. So it is like a 1 in a million terminal condition, even pre-cancer, because they don't have the material to protect against the cancer. So the cancer is inevitable.
100%.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on top of that, he has actually 2 or 3 of those various pre-cancer terminal conditions.
Wow.
Where honestly, he shouldn't have made it past infancy. The fact that he's made it far enough for me to do anything is a miracle. He's already bypassed 1 in a billion odds to get here, right, which is what actually gives me hope. Because I know if he's made it this far, Aaron's odds to survive this far, as I would understand them, and I feel like I'm qualified to understand this, he has beaten odds Jill would have beaten to live already by like a large number. Because even though she had a more aggressive active disease, his architecture is far more complex and broken at far more. Like if you think about it this way, she had working architecture in other parts of her body outside of this tumor tissue taking over her system. But he doesn't. His architecture is broken in critical parts everywhere from baseline. Right. So even if I were to like cure the cancer, there are other parts of his healthy tissue that can't actually defend him against that anyway, whereas she had a chance at that. So in addition to that, he has many broken parts, but we have like neuron death, slow neuron death because of a lack of energy, like glucose hypermetabolism, insulin issues. But the primary one, aside from the cancer, is ALS. So he has what's called a gain of function, a frame shift in the ALS gene. So typically the way that this would work is if both parents' copies are completely toxic, then the child would die in infancy of ALS. Because he has one toxic and one somewhat working, then his would be early adolescence, late childhood, and not infancy. In other words, that second one is bought maybe 10 years, whereas if both copies were gone, he'd have died of the ALS in infancy. So essentially we have multiple cancer syndromes, we have many forms of neurodegeneration, but the most toxic and like genetically clinical one would be the ALS, but it's really not really ALS. It's just a compounding failure of too many weak points. I just wanted to kind of put it down to two things that people could pinpoint, so it's easier for people to understand.
And ALS is Lou Gehrig's disease.
That's right. Yeah. So it's like total motor neuron failure and the inability for the neurofilament to actually create the right material to even axonal growth, synaptic growth.
That's Michael J. Fox.
Parkinson's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought he
So
had
the ALS is kind of where the whole body just starts to break down.
Right.
And it is neurodegeneration, but it kind of goes through the spine and everything else.
Okay.
But in Aaron's case, it's still not really that. It's still really a collapsing system. That and the cancer are just the two primary drivers. But it's really a whole network of failures that will be pulled down with it. So if you think about Jill or any severe, like ultra deadly disease as like a burning building, and you have to go in, you got to blow out all the fire and pull the people out. Aaron isn't like a burning building. He's an extremely unique case. He's like broken windows, infestation in the walls, sinking into the ground, and a storm is coming. Completely different kind of problem, which is why that Aaron is the key to everyone, because Aaron has these compounding failures are also linked in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Like he has like the APOs, the pink ones, and all of these like different genetic disease components, which would be benign in his case if he didn't have these other things pulling it down.
Does he have two copies of the APOE4?
No, he's just got the one,
Yeah.
right? Which kind of goes back to the whole point in Aaron's case, which is unique. He's got a single broken copy across most of these, but because he's got a few really critical broken ones, the others act like compounding failure, like they escalate and accelerate the failure. Whereas if he just had APO, just had the Alzheimer's, that wouldn't affect him until he was 70. But because he's got all of these severe genetic disorders pulling it down fast, it becomes another point of accelerated failure.
Right.
So most of those genes in Aaron's case are not deadly. They accelerate what is deadly and make it much faster and harder to stop.
Yeah.
So, and I could list dozens of them that are in this case, like insulin failure ones, specifically neurologically, collagen failure, visual cortex to eye to retina, Wolfram syndrome, like again, so we have, if any of these were individual, Aaron wouldn't feel them till he was much later in life. But they're in a system where we have either toxic or failed genes with accelerated pediatric mortality. So then all of these begin to compound and accelerate that failure. So then it's not just a matter of like ALS or a ultra lethal metastatic cancer, but actually the insulin levels in the neurons are not getting enough energy as well. And the collagen in between the eyes and the brain is also not being built as well. So then you have all of these things compounding, and then that's why it just starts to sink. So in Aaron's case, we cannot save him by just restoring an ALS gene or by just restoring a cancer gene. We have to essentially normalize large amounts of the entire genome. We basically need to restore a dozen to 24 different genes on different chromosomes in different organ places. And honestly, doing a dozen isn't actually much different than doing 2 or 3 dozen because of the interconnected network I have to use. Think of it like the house is sinking, the windows are broken, your termites in the walls, and a storm is coming. And if I had to get a crane to go under the house and lift it up and build protections around it, Well, it wouldn't, with that much infrastructure, it wouldn't make a difference if I had to do the next house next to it. The hardest part is actually getting in and doing it. Now, in Aaron's case, we don't really know how long we have. The truth be told is he really should have had an ultra metastatic cancer already by normal conventional understanding. So, tick-tock goes the clock. The neurodegeneration is more predictable and slower. I would say we probably have like 5 years of a kind of predictable collapse. But on the cancer side, I mean, it could literally be triggered any day. It's so volatile. So I've got to work pretty fast, and I've been trying to, but he is a very complex case, the most complex case by far,
What is his quality of life like today? I mean, what is he doing? What's he, is he going to school? How old is he again?
6.5.
6.5.
Yeah.
Okay.
His quality of life he's still pretty good. He's in way better shape than he should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that he should be at hospice right now, but given the genotype and given the activity of these breaks, he is way better off than I would have thought.
Good.
So his quality of life right now is pretty good. He has very severe neurodevelopmental disorder. He also is starting to lose, obviously, some function. Like we're seeing cerebellar issues as well, like tripping up occasionally. Mm-hmm. But overall, he's still pretty functional.
Mm-hmm. Good. And the doctors, you're working with traditional doctors that are, no. Okay.
No. I did see traditional doctors, but they're aside from surveillance, like to make sure that no metastasis is opening up. This is not a problem they could even begin to solve.
Okay.
Yeah. They don't even have a 1% chance. They have a 0% chance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
An absolute zero.
Okay.
But I do have, I've got hundreds of doctors who support me and who are in my circle, who I consult when I need to about stuff. But the truth is that the only way Aaron lives is if I make it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. My son's 6.5 as well. That's right. So what does he know? Probably nothing of what's going on, right? I mean, yeah.
Nope.
Right.
No, nothing. It's kind of it's an interesting thing. And honestly, that's kind of more the severe disability, the severe autism, where he's kind of in his own world. He's not really aware of what's happening, He's not really aware of the environment. But I do think there's something, I'm going to sound crazy again. They'll write a whole new Reddit thread about me after this podcast because they'll be like, Marc Malone is insane. But I do think there's something deeply spiritual in children like this, especially him. I remember when Jill was dying, Aaron, I had her at home. I only took her into hospice the final week of her life. And in that final week, it was just me and her there. That's what she wanted. But I had her at home up until that final week, and I would take care of her. And the day before she went into the hospice facility, Aaron jumped on the bed. He was only 3. The other 2 were super little. And he grabbed her head and screamed at her face like this. He'd never done that before. The thing is that I took her into the hospice facility the next day and he never saw her again and never would. But it's like he knew. I didn't even know I was taking her into the hospice facility the next day. And it gets even weirder because the day she died, November 2nd, exactly a week later, he was in school. And the teacher messaged me and said that he was pulling teacher's hair and scratching and screaming. Never done that before and never done it again. Only did it the day she died. But he didn't even know she was dying in the hospice. But He did.
Wow.
He could feel it. Yeah. And he was very, very, very tuned in energetically. Whether we look at it from a perspective of psychic or whether we look at it from a perspective of the fact that as an autistic brain, he might be bypassed on the prefrontal cortex, or even the whole neocortex area might not be working so well. But the truth is that he's actually banking a lot more subconscious energy than we think. Or rather, he might actually just be absorbing a lot more like peripheral energy that he can't contextualize and understand. You know, but whichever way it is, he definitely is tuned in energetically. And I think he's again, might sound crazy, but I think he knows like what he is here to do, you know? And I think we're going to succeed.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, yeah. So what are the next steps then? Like, what's your plan? What do you have kind of, you know, coming up in terms of how I'm sure you've got you know, things that you need to accomplish in a certain amount of time, and you've got a plan out, you know, documented. What does it look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have like 3 primary tracks that I have to run in parallel that are completely separate. The gene reprogramming that we started in Jill's case, that I am developing further in Aaron's case, if we succeed, we're going to be able to essentially restore, without editing DNA, even the worst of genetic disease mutations. Because the whole idea of a mutation is that because the DNA sequence is so off, like in Aaron's case, we're not just dealing with like silenced genes like in Jill's, where we need to remove that material and get them back online. The actual DNA sequence at the core of it isn't working. But I think that so much of the core of that DNA sequence that isn't working is because of the very material on top of it. In other words, the gene as a whole, not just the DNA. So I still think that what Aaron is going to allow us to do is, even when there are real structural DNA problems, the gene will still be able to express itself to some normal degree. And if we do that, then we take this whole thing to a whole other level, because then we're not just switching genes back on, which already is like 1 billion people's disease, but we're actually able to take DNA communication issues to that gene and make them start to express themselves normally. Because in Aaron's case, I have to do that. So the goal with the gene reprogramming as track 1 is for us to continue to try to develop that, continue to try to build what I learned after I did the first version with Jill, which is like how do you change the metabolism of disease cells without breaking it in other cells, all of that stuff. And in Aaron's case, we have to basically light up the genome like a Christmas tree. We have to switch on lots of parts and places in different regions of the brain, in different organ tissue. And I think we can, because we already did switch genes back on in different tissue types across chromosomes. But now we have to do it at a bigger scale. So we're going to be running that. And then aside from that, we have this cancer stem cell elimination, which we have to do. And I want to get that into a patient program as soon as possible.
Right.
And then on the third track, I'm trying to do something like more decentralized. We have a little crew working together to try to do something that we can do like direct to consumer, that doesn't require like a deep drug or deep FDA kind of process, because the cancer drug is going to be safe, is going to work tremendously well. But even then, it's still 3 years best case to get it like out to the world, because that's like the fastest they could move it in FDA pipeline.
Okay.
So let's say over the next 3 years, we continue to do those patient programs, get the data, and then 3 years from now, the world finally has a core cancer drug that can work for everyone. The gene reprogramming, this is the apex of all bioscience. This is the apex of everything molecular science at all, because this is the vast majority of disorder and disease.
Right.
That might take longer, but I do think that, again, Aaron is going to give us phases. So the way that I view it is that next year we'll have like a cluster of disorders we can solve. And then a year after that, we'll have another cluster. And as I continue to crank away at this for Aaron, he'll give us a whole new cluster of diseases. And by the end of it, 5 years from now, we'll have Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, severe autism, rare chromosome disorders, all mapped out and ready. Because we're going to do that through him. And then the third one is this direct consumer thing where...
That'd be great because I also have that APOE4 gene, that Alzheimer's gene. So, yeah, get to work on that one.
We'll solve that one. That one's going to be one of the easier ones.
Good.
Actually, the Parkinson's and the Alzheimer's, we've mapped out a lot of this already. And the hardest disease category is actually something like ALS, where it's the problem is the gene is producing toxic protein. So the gene is toxic. Whereas in a lot of the other disorders, like in Parkinson's, PINK1 is often like shut off or underproducing protein, what's called a hypomorphic mutation, where the gene isn't producing enough sequence. Like it's not protecting, like the cancer gene. It's not sending the protection sequence. Through Jill and Aaron, mostly through Aaron, I already have the path to getting those genes back online. If we can get someone who doesn't want to take me as a slave to another country to fund it, we'll be able to get those genes back online. The hardest category, the two hardest categories is this like toxic one, because we're not trying to improve function there. The function itself is inherently broken and bad, and that's like ALS. The other hardest one is the children like Aaron and Sky and other children that are born with rare genetic chromosome disorders, because it's like deeply baked into the cake, you know? It's like they've come out that way. Some of them, like, they have genes completely knocked out, some cases deleted, which is the hardest one of all. So those are like the two hardest categories that are going to be the long run. But I think along this journey of the next couple of years, if we have the infrastructure to do it, we're going to be able to switch on some of these, like the Parkinson's, the Alzheimer's, and even some forms of autism for sure. But the cancer one is, I would prefer to be the public priority, even though my priority is save my son, because it's something we genuinely could do like as soon as possible. And it doesn't require waiting for me to invent new things. Like, we can just do that. And it is one of the worst diseases known to human history. And it would be nice to finally eradicate it and get a handle on it. The direct consumer thing I'm trying to build, because I don't want everyone to have to wait years for help and intervention. So through my youngest daughter, Sky, because she's 4, I was like, and she's not terminal. I was like, I can't bombard the girl with, pharmacological agents, and like her life isn't at stake, and she's super small. So I was forced to go completely outside of like drug territory and think completely outside the box. And how can I design like nutraceutical agents that are like super low risk and appropriate for a 4-year-old, but that would reverse something as deep as like a genetic autism.
Right.
And that's what I spent in parallel to Aaron's stuff, I spent most of the year working on that. And I've, as of just the last couple of weeks, finished designing it. So we're going to have essentially like a nutraceutical formulation of a number of molecules and compounds that would be legally and ethically able to go straight to the consumer. No FDA approvals or anything. I'm using things that have already known safety profiles and things. We've improved the delivery system on all of them to make sure they actually reach their target destinations, like I did with the drug. And then we can get that straight to the world. And that could be done in months. So those are the 3 tracks. And that one was important because I have so many suffering people that want help. And I'm like, a drug path is a drug path. I can't make it any faster. But this is something we can do fast and get straight to the world. And this would help with a lot of conditions, because this isn't like a deep gene reprogramming or like, curing cancer. But what it is going to do, if it works as well as I hope and designed, it is going to shift gene expression, but it's not going to shift it so hard where we would require deep pharmacological agents. It's not going to shift it so hard where we would need to monitor the gene expression. It's only going to work within what biology would allow naturally. So, for example, we know, like with the fasting, and we had to use some of that in Joel's case with that glucose-glutamine starvation of the cancer cell. That helped induce epigenetic expression difference as part of my triune system. It was a part of that metabolic pillar of the 3 pillars. And of course, that's available to anyone to do anytime, anywhere, right? It's not a drug. The point is that there are ways that we can shift gene expression naturally, safely, within reasonable limits. We can't gene reprogram. We can't cure cancer, but we can make the cell more permissive to express itself in a healthier way. So the nutraceutical delivery and optimized delivery that I'm trying to make, I made with the safety and efficacy of a struggling 4-year-old in mind. Right. So it had to work and also be safe, because if it ain't going to work, it's a waste of my time. It's not going to help my daughter. But if it's not safe, I can't give it to her. So I think it's going to have tremendous impact. One of the most amazing things about it is it's going to essentially reverse the core inflammatory signals that shoot in most disease. See, in the brain of a neurodevelopmental child, a severely autistic child, there is a lot of metabolic and inflammatory problems. There are things like calcium ion overload between like CA1 neurons not getting enough, CA2 getting too much in the hippocampus, for example. And then these are causing like inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6, whatever, tumor necrosis factor alpha. And these cytokines are causing like basically brain inflammation. But interestingly enough, if you get like a viral infection and your body starts to overfight it and we start to die because our body is fighting so hard, it's the same inflammatory cytokines, things like interleukin 1 beta and interleukin 6. So by sort of reversing this brain inflammation, we can also reverse a lot of inflammation for all sorts of conditions, like arthritis, lupus, long COVID. And we can do it safely and direct to the people. I'm by no means saying it's going to solve all of these conditions, but I expect that it will help tremendously. Yeah. So that's the goal with that. And that's primarily kind of regulating the cellular environment to fight inflammation-related disorder, which is a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's going to do a really good job of that. So that's going to be the thing that the world gets fastest. And you can thank my youngest daughter for that, because she forced me into this other box of what can I do fast that's safe and effective. So you see, each person of the family has given the world something new. Jill gave the world the path to curing cancer. Aaron is going to give the world the path to broad spectrum genetic disease therapy. And Sky's given the world safe direct to consumer therapy, you know?
Nice.
They've all played their part, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, inflammation is it impacts so many people, and so many people don't realize that they're being impacted by inflammation. It's I think the last 3 times. Well, I got a blood test done, and so it measured all of it was like 7 vials of blood. I was doing a 10-day fast, and I didn't realize that I had an appointment on the 10th day to get blood drawn. So in hindsight, I probably would not have drawn 7 vials of blood on the 10th day of a 10-day fast. I was not in a good mood after that, but trying to take a walk and was, like falling on the street, but not falling, but sitting down. But that told me all of these things that I had histamine responses to, all these foods. And so, when you go to an allergist and you get tested for things and it's not food, it's always just external allergens, dogs or dust mites or dust or, whatever it is. But this was a fantastic one because you were able to test for foods. And that's really what, for the most part, keeps people in this inflammatory state. It seems like that's a major part of what's happening in America with people being inflamed. It's because we don't realize that we have these histamine responses to various foods. Mine's like pineapple and strawberry and Brussels sprouts and tomatoes and eggs and milk, dairy, just all these things that when I stop eating them, my inflammation just goes away immediately. But I think the last 3 times that I've felt like I've had no inflammation is travel to Europe for like 2 weeks because the food there is just sourced differently, it's grown differently, it's cleaner. And then this fast that I did, I mean, inflammation within 24 hours of not eating to 48 hours, it really goes away. That's when all of your inflammation is gone. But you're right, it's such an important part of the health of everyday people, specifically Americans, because of diet, and it's just something that people, we're hooked on this food system, and it's like the way this stuff is made is just so toxic for people, and it's the cause of so many different types of diseases. And I just felt compelled to mention that because for anyone who doesn't kind of realize that a lot of your inflammation is coming from things that you might not even realize you're quote unquote allergic to, or you have this histamine response to. And I just encourage as many people as possible to go get tested for that.
The histamine one's an interesting one, because histamine is also a neurotransmitter. People don't know that, but it's a neurotransmitter of like mood, just like serotonin or dopamine. Histamine responses, like histamine receptors, like 1, 2, 3, are involved in like migraines, for example.
Yep.
Lots of deep biological areas, even ADHD and schizophrenia to some degree.
Yep.
So the cytokines I was mentioning, like interleukin 1 and 6 and stuff, they're kind of like adjacent to that. They're the deepest inflammation response in the body, really. And they're a response to fighting problems. So if let's say you get some pesticide come in, well, it's going to create inflammation. There's like, toxicity. The immune system, the body's like, fight it.
Fight it, right.
And then it creates chronic sickness. At a deeper level, what ends up happening with some of these like chronic autoimmune diseases, like if you get like an infection, like an Epstein-Barr, which is kind of harmless to most people, but it does cause havoc because it stays in the body a long time. It's not because it's a deadly disease. It's because the body doesn't clear it. The spike protein is an example. Spike protein I found interesting because it kind of like works a bit like the glyphosate in that sense, where it causes a chronic inflammatory response, which kind of downregulates the gene. Doesn't necessarily like switch them off, but turns the volume down. So you can see again how biology is a cyclical process. You might have a spike protein signal, which comes out of ribosomes in the cell, the cytosol. It's not in the nucleus. So the spike protein isn't going to like gene areas. But what happens is it's communicating out like this signal, and then the inflammation is fighting it. And those cytokines of inflammation over time are fighting that spike protein are what can shut down gene expression. So it's like it's causing the response, which is causing the problem.
Right.
So if we have a safe and direct way of like going to those core genes that are shooting that inflammation and basically stop them, we would solve we're not going to solve ALS or Alzheimer's, but we could solve a lot of chronic sickness just by simply going, you don't need to fight anymore. That's what we're doing. We're going into the body and we have to target very specific areas, and we have to basically say, stand down, soldier, don't need to fight anymore.
Right,
because it's honestly the body fighting that is causing the sickness. We see it in Lyme's disease or in chronic diseases of all kinds.
I had that too.
You did? Oh,
I had Lyme's disease, and I took a test and I tested positive, and then I changed my diet and I did all this Eastern medicine stuff for it and took all this stuff and did acupuncture, and I got tested again and it wasn't there. So, and I know Lyme's disease is it never goes away once you had it. But the amount the amount of bacteria that was hiding within my blood was undetectable the second time I took it after fasting and doing all this stuff. So I still feel like, brain fog and stuff like that from time to time, but I don't know how much of that is just natural, normal memory stuff, versus like actual Lyme's.
I think I never ever believe that things can't get better or go away. Yeah. I've seen it in the hardest of cases. What I will say though is that it can be very tricky. And where I go is I try to create things that can, like in a traditional scientific format, I try to create things that can be standardized across people. Like our biology is so idiosyncratic and so unique to you and me that you could go in and do X, Y, Z, and it worked for you, and I go in and do it, and it doesn't work for me,
Right.
So, like, I remember for example, spontaneous remissions happen in some 1 in 100,000 cancer patients, right? Like there may actually be some key high consciousness moment that truly could clear all disease. There was this one woman who died of stage 4 cancer. She had a near-death experience. And then she got sent back. And then her cancer went away. And that's kind of interesting because usually near-death experiences are deaths where you could bring them back. But stage 4 cancer, that's a weird near-death experience because that means you're still coming back into a dying body.
Right.
So the cancer would then have to reverse, but it did.
Can you send me that documentation on that?
It's a YouTube interview of this woman. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I love this shit.
Spontaneous remissions do happen in some 1 in 100,000 cancer patients. But the point is that I often tell people, even though miracles do happen, we can't standardize miracles.
Right.
I'm a mere mortal and I don't have the power to make miracles happen. All I have the power to do is do something that I know can work consistently and reproduce over time.
Right.
So that's what I do.
Hope is not a strategy.
No.
Right.
No. But it's not to say that there isn't, like in each person's individual life, I do believe what we'd call miracles do happen. But yeah, that can't work as a form. It's just like in anything. Can't run a business that way. Can't run a country that way. Can't cure diseases that way.
Right.
Even though that there are always going to be people that do somehow find the miracle. And that could be you. Unfortunately, that's never been me. So I've had to do it through the hard sciences. But yeah, inflammation is a big problem. And it basically works like metabolism in the sense that a dysregulated inflammatory system, like a dysregulated metabolic system, doesn't reset often on its own. It just keeps working that way until something forces a reset. And the whole structure, the way that I do molecular science, is to hit multiple targets simultaneously, and simultaneous being the key. No one individual target would ever solve complex problems like this. If you had a gene therapy for autism, you would only solve 1% of autism. Most autism comes from way too many different genes. Most of it is more epigenetic than DNA level, which means it's like all of these locks in the genes that I unlocked, which fixing the DNA wouldn't necessarily solve. And then, of course, it's like metabolic, it's ion channels, it's this, it's that, it's inflammation. So to really solve any disease, we must hit like multiple high leverage targets simultaneously. And then we basically are setting the conditions for the cell to return to its default baseline. And that's really the point of everything I'm doing in whichever area it is in. At the end of the day, I've always just been forced to have to do what my family has needed me to do.
Right.
You know?
Do you have a job as well? And something? Yeah. So in addition to all this work that you're doing and raising 3 kids, you also have a day job.
Yep. I have to work in between doing all this work to get, obviously pay bills.
Right.
So I work in between doing the first human gene reprogramming, then figuring out a functional cancer cure, then losing my wife and raising 3 children, 2 with special needs, and now having to solve every genetic disease and also build a direct-to-consumer nutraceutical therapy to solve inflammation and metabolism. I do also still have to work in between all of that, yeah. Yep.
Have you ever thought, like, instead of waiting for an investor, big investor or whatever, like some other form of like GoFundMe or something, and to raise money to be able to continue your research?
Yeah, so this direct-to-consumer, I keep calling it a therapy, but I can't actually call it a therapy when we release it, because otherwise that would make it, something the FDA would have to approve. This nutraceutical stack that we're going to give to people directly, this is going to be a fully decentralized mechanism.
Okay.
So people are going to be able to buy into it. They'll also be able to own a stake of it if they buy into it.
Okay.
And it's something the world can get very fast.
Okay.
So this is going to be the pathway to doing essentially a decentralized science operation. That
tokenized?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
It was other people's idea, not mine. I'm focused, deeply in the scientific part of it.
Yeah.
So people close to me, and people close to them kind of came together and said, we're going to kind of build it this way, do a token, decentralized science. Other people, if people buy in, they maybe even get some kind of form of equity or shares or whatever.
Ethereum, Solana?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be that. So then, and I don't know anything about any of that stuff at all. Like, I'm a complete boomer when it comes to crypto. So
I know way too much.
Yeah.
It has been a down cycle for a long time.
Has it?
And I'm over it.
The thing is with it, though, is that I think it is that whole control aspect you can give back to people.
Yeah.
So this way, people will be able to buy into it, own a piece, and get whatever people get when they do these things, because I don't know. Yeah. But what I do know is that we'll be able to build it fast if we have the resources to, because we don't need legal.
You're right. That's a brilliant way to do it. It's a brilliant way to set it up.
So that's going to be sort of the immediate priority, while I have to do the cancer through traditional paths, because otherwise there's no way they're ever going to let it get out to the world, or however long I'll be around to even do it.
Right.
So with the cancer, I have to be super strategic and careful, because I have people who ask me all the time, they're like, why are you hoarding, a cure for cancer? And it's like, firstly, it's not an absolute cure. We discussed all that. But the other thing is, I can't just give you chemistry and molecules, because that's not legal for me to even do, because I re-engineered an existing drug with a doctor and a pharmacist, and I can't legally pass that around to people. The other thing is, I'll be killed if I do. So, if we actually want this to get out to the world, it has to be done properly, where we have to have stakeholders and they have their part in it too.
Right.
Because otherwise nobody gets it.
Right.
You know? So it has to be done in, a strategic way.
Right.
But this part we can just do straight to the world, and we want to try to do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's easy to do too. I mean, you can, to set that up and to launch it. But, well, that's fantastic. I mean, this has been just an incredible conversation, and you've been super, vulnerable and open, and sharing a lot of detail and personal detail, and talking through a lot of stuff that I know is a challenge to talk about, and difficult to relive some of the, the moments that you've been through. How can people, how can people support, or, how can people follow you, or kind of support your work at this stage prior to the tokenization?
Yeah. Honestly, you can follow me on X and TikTok and stuff like that. I think TikTok banned most of my videos. So maybe X is probably the only platform that I'm kind of safe to post on. So you can follow me there. You can obviously go to amidbiogenetics.com, but there's not really much there. I think the most important way it would be, when we do this, for people to come part of this decentralized project. They can actually be a part of it. They can earn shares or whatever the system is that they set up. And also they get to be part of giving the world something that's safe and effective fast.
Right.
So that would be the best way to support. Aside from that, I think just to amplify look, I get told a lot from people, some powerful people even, many of which have reached out to me. I have supporters at top institutions. I also have people that don't like me at top institutions. I have powerful people who love me and powerful people that hate me. But the consistent thing that I've heard a lot is that at the end of the day, the science might not be the most important part of the story in the end, but it might actually just be a story of how far human will can push. Because not just in Jill's case, but through everything we experienced after, everything, picking up the pieces, dealing with children that having another terminal clock, having disabilities, having to figure out all of this alone. It has been like being at war constantly for years, and in the hardest conditions. We talked about my story at the beginning, but man, compared to watching Jill die, all of that stuff was a breeze. Yeah. And the only thing I can think of more terrifying than what I've already been through is what I'm going to have to watch Aaron through if I don't succeed. And a lot of the people reach out to me, and they say that they're inspired, by the story as much as the science. And if there's one thing that could help us there, it's that to bring the team together, because at the end of the day, I'm only one guy. If we're going to be able to do this, I'm going to need everyone else too. Going to need the support. Going to need the connections, going to need everything, because this is something that affects every single person on Earth. Half the world is sick, and the other half are the family and friends of the sick. So it affects literally everybody.
Right.
And the truth is that the human race is getting sicker. Like, more children born disabled than ever. Less deaths in childbirth, certainly, way less. But way more born with chronic illness than before.
Right.
More young people dying of cancer or have autoimmune diseases than ever. And of course, 25% of the population is infertile, which is going to climb too. So we are in a situation where it might not look like it right now, but if we're not successful here, 2-3 decades from now, the human race is like going to start going off a cliff. And all of the stuff that we fought over will become meaningless, because if we don't have our biology intact, we don't have anything. If we don't have our own hardware and software, what political system we have, what economic system we have, AI, it's all meaningless if we don't work anymore.
Right.
And I think the most important thing is that we realize that sooner rather than later. Because what I'd hate to see is 10, 20 years from now, because of the sickness and the degeneration that we have gone through, babies have to be born in, gene therapy, pre-embryonic gene therapy, or be born in test tubes, because we're not able to do it naturally anymore, and everything that we're doing in this mission, in this work, is to make sure that that future doesn't happen.
Right.
And, I believe we're going to succeed, and you can thank Jill and Aaron for that when that day comes. If I can survive long enough to get that day to come.
Love it. Well, that's powerful, man. That's it's been amazing, chatting. But I feel like that's a powerful way to kind of close out the conversation. If you're good with that.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure, man.
For sure. It's been great. Yeah, you've enjoyed the experience then?
Yeah, it's been great.
Good.
You have a great operation here.
Good.
It's really cool. I love the environment. I love all of the different things you've got going on here.
Yeah, we enjoyed hosting you, and I got a lot out of this and learned a lot, and want to stay in touch too, and support your mission. So, it's been great to connect, great to get to know you, and I'm inspired and optimistic about the future. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Thank you.